And the Oscar goes to...
And the Oscar goes to...
And the Oscar goes to...
I don't care!
What's next?
What's next?
What's next?
Don't you want to hear what's next?
What are you going to do next?
What's next for you?
What's next?
What's next?
Okay, so what's next?
I'm Connor Old, and welcome back to another episode of After the Gold. And this week we're covering probably the only movie that's going to be released in the 2020s on this series, Guillermo del Toro's follow-up to the Best Picture winning The Shape of Water. We're going to be looking at 2021's Nightmare Alley. But if you're new to the series, what we do every single week is talk about Best Picture follow-ups. We talk about the movie after the movie that won Best Picture. What did the director decide to make right after winning Best Picture, having some of this clout and success, and what do they kind of cash that blank check in on? We talk about the Oscars history, what happened to the Best Picture follow-up. Did it also win Best Picture in the case of something like Lawrence of Arabia, or did it get no nominations like Widows? And then in the second half of the video, talk about my thoughts on the film, why I wanted to cover this movie in particular, because we don't really have an order. We're jumping off all over the place with these videos, with the one commonality ultimately being, though, a movie that I think is interesting either in its content or its production history. And I've been having a lot of fun with this series, so if you guys want to have any suggestions as well in terms of future videos, or just want to give your thoughts on the video and the movie at hand, feel free to comment down below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. But without further ado, let's jump into things, starting off with the production history of Nightmare Alley and kind of the reason I wanted to cover it. And that was because I was doing Old's Oscar Countdown, the flagship series on this channel, during this time period. I was covering Nightmare Alley at the time, so I have a strong understanding of what the movie was and how it was received. And this is also the unique situation in which we've been going for Old's Oscar Countdown for so long. Not only did I cover the Nightmare Alley season, I also covered the Shape of Water season. I remember at that time it was a horse race between three billboards outside Ebbing, Missouri, and The Shape of Water, with The Shape of Water ultimately winning. And in hindsight, kind of a little bit of an odd winner, just in the sense that there's only been three Best Picture winners to not also won a acting award as well within the past 10 years. So it is kind of a unique situation there, where it was so much focused on Del Toro and finally kind of getting him an Oscar, rather than it was, we really like the actors in this movie, and it's just kind of like a sweep of momentum. And what's interesting as well about how the movie I think is perceived, and I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below, is I don't know if it's as acclaimed as some of the other winners from that decade. I think that, you know, some people, what they'll say is The Shape of Water is a classic example of the modern Academy, because in the 70s they wouldn't have rewarded a movie in which a girl falls in love with a fish, right? That's so crazy and weird. I think that's kind of a silly argument. I think if you've seen the movie, it is very classical and in structure and its fairy tale approach, and kind of good guys and clear drawn villains. So I think actually The Shape of Water was released in the 80s. It probably would have won Best Picture too. And actually movies like Nomadland or Anora are more indicative of the newer Academy and their kind of more independent tastes. But it was a huge box office success at the time, really well liked, and I do think the modern day reputation is like, I'm glad Del Toro has an Oscar. He is a very well celebrated director, even if it's maybe not his agreed upon best film. And yet, what he decided to do is really cash his check after making The Shape of Water. What's interesting about him is that he's not an up-and-coming director like we've covered in the past, like a Oliver Stone last week. But he's also not a kind of James Cameron level huge mega director, and he's definitely not like a Sean Baker, where he's just going to make indie movies for the rest of his life. Guillermo del Toro started off small with some of his Spanish language films and then quickly jumped up. And before this, he had a couple of kind of critically mixed movies, but huge box office type movies, or huge budget at the very least movies, with movies like Pacific Rim and Crimson Peak. And then he actually scales down to do The Shape of Water to get a little bit more control, wins the Oscar, and then goes, okay, well, I want to go back up to the budget that I was at, and sets up two projects, which is really interesting. he kind of uses his Best Picture follow-up status here and cashes it in on 2 projects. One being Pinocchio at Netflix, which goes on to win an Oscar and was successful. And then this movie here, Nightmare Alley. And it really is, in my mind, a type of movie that we very rarely see, and the only type of movie that could have been made after someone had won Best Picture, which is what I love about this series, is we get to cover really unique, interesting movies that are kind of made not dissimilar to something like Mickey 17, which we saw earlier in the year. The studios really, believe in filmmakers coming off of Best Picture winning films and really give them a lot of support, because you're talking about a movie like The Shape of Water, which goes from $20 million in budget, to Nightmare Alley, which is $60 million. And the reason why I say it's a movie we don't really see that often anymore is because it's a middle budget film. We don't see those very often, where it's usually a $10, $20 million movie and you're an indie movie, or you're a $250 million huge blockbuster. The budgets in the middle, 60, 70, $80 million type movies, we rarely see nowadays. And maybe we don't see these types of movies because they don't do too well at the box office. The movie did come out, no action scenes, mid-budget adult drama. Does decent business, but not the huge success that The Shape of Water was. And I think at the time it was appreciated in the sense that it got nominated for Best Picture. But in hindsight, it was maybe a little bit of a disappointment, particularly with how well The Shape of Water did. A kind of classic Best Picture follow-up in that the previous movie wins Best Picture, wins a bunch of other Oscars, gets nominated for a bunch. The next one kind of gets a bit of a fringe Best Picture nomination, a couple of other nominations, and then doesn't win anything. Also doesn't do as well at the box office. So, maybe a little bit more commercially challenging type of a movie. I think Nightmare Alley is more so than The Shape of Water, but personally I find that a little bit more interesting, as a matter of fact. And I always think about this movie as a kind of classic modern Oscar movie, because in the 2010s, there was a period of time in which every year there was about 8 or 9 movies that were nominated for the Oscars. That there was technically an availability of, you could nominate up to 10, but because of the way the voting system happened to be, most years it was 7, 8, 9 movies. It never really got to 10. But in 2021, this was the first year in which we had a full, you have to nominate 10 movies, so we can get a surprise like Nightmare Alley, which I would be very surprised if it wasn't, in terms of the voting totals, 9th or probably 10th. And we see movies like this, or Women Talking. So in the hindsight of things, hey, the Best Picture follow-up movie got nominated for Best Picture and got nominated for a bunch of Oscars. That's a success. But I think it's also a product of the kind of new Academy system that, if it was released a year earlier, it probably wouldn't have been nominated for Best Picture and probably would have been kind of on that outside looking in. So it's kind of interesting from an Oscars perspective, and still, though, a kind of classic in terms of production history, Oscar Best Picture follow-up type of a movie. So now transitioning into my thoughts on the film, the first thing that kind of jumped out to me is that this is a classic cast of a Best Picture follow-up movie. We kind of talked about this with Widows, although that was kind of a cast that was looking ahead and had some good scouting in that regard. This is a classic example of Guillermo del Toro, well-respected director, just won Best Picture. He can get anyone he wants for his next movie, and he does. And, Academy Award winner Mary Steenburgen is essentially in one scene, technically 1.5, but that half scene only lasts about 10 seconds. Incredible cast all around. I mean, someone like Tim Blake Nelson is another actor in one scene. Clifton Collins Jr. is another one who isn't even in a scene. He's just a part of the carnies and is in the background, and I think has maybe 2 lines of dialogue. It's just a murderer's row where you notice that right away, where you go, wow, okay, everyone's in this movie. As we introduce more characters in the second half, it's just Academy Award nominated actor after Academy Award nominated actor. It's very impressive, and as a film fan, really enjoyable from that perspective. And the other thing that really struck me on this most recent rewatch is how the plot and the story and the kind of hook for the movie doesn't start until 1 hour into the movie. I checked, and it was the 1 hour mark in which we leave the kind of carnival world. And that's actually my favorite part of the movie. The first hour really is taking a man like Carlisle down on his luck, entering this world of carnies, kind of learning a trade, learning the rules, being the colorful cast of characters. It kind of felt like a Robert Altman, MASH, Nashville kind of a style of a hangout movie in this really interesting world. which, I probably could have watched a 2-hour movie of that, kind of like a Carney, Dazed and Confused with Del Toro, because I really do think he has a lot of love and admiration and respect for these performers and kind of these freak show type people and people on the outskirts. A lot of kind of Todd Browning Freaks influence, I think, is clear there. And then the second half of the movie, though, still is propulsive, still is interesting, more kind of the downfall or the darker sides of the movie. And I've had some trouble connecting sometimes with Del Toro's films, because I think he always appreciates and has a deep love for the creatures and kind of that element of his movies more than maybe I do. So what I love about this movie, and why it's actually one of my favorite Del Toro movies, is because the creatures and the darkness really is in the humans, and the kind of blackness of the human soul and the darkness within all of us, and how bluntly some of these conversations has in terms of how you can con someone to do something, how you can trick them for entertainment, and that kind of a line between becoming kind of a trickster for entertainment and a trickster to be a con artist, and how that kind of can be a fudgy line, and some of the kind of morals and ethical questions that the movie does present. Which then leads to one of the best endings of this past decade, instantly recognizable. I knew exactly where it was going, and when it does happen, the first time watching it, I just had this huge smile on my face, realizing and putting together kind of the full journey that we were on. But I think it's also, I'd be remiss to not mention some of the technical craft of Del Toro's films. It's always so excellent, but you have to mention it. The kind of production design and set design, Tamara Deverell and the cinematographer Dan Louston, both of which were nominated for the film. There's a real synchronicity to the real life sets, and the set, not just set extensions through CGI, but actual built real sets, whether it be the therapist, the Kate Blanchett's character, her kind of the office, or the kind of a stage in the second half, or all the kind of great carnival sets that have going on. Just the way Louston in particular uses some of the shadow and the rain. It's incredibly evocative of this kind of classic noir time period, just in a modern day setting. So those are the things that kind of jumped out to me. Was the cast is incredible, and clearly a Best Picture follow-up type of a cast, and then kind of the technical elements of Del Toro that he's always good at. But I think the reason why I liked this movie more than The Shape of Water, or even some of other Del Toro's films, is because of, like I said, that kind of dark themes, and how I think actually relevant and how much of a comment Del Toro is making on modern day culture, even though it's set in the period piece. And that was something that really jumped out to me on this most recent rewatch as well, where you always ask a filmmaker, okay, you're making a period piece, are you using a period piece just to play with your toys, or are you using the period piece to kind of comment on modern day society? This is a 40s noir film, and noirs are notable for kind of being lenses through which they can talk about kind of societal issues and genres, particularly in kind of post-World War II. You can read a lot of books and understand kind of the commentaries that the noir genre really was responsible for. So what's fascinating about this movie is they decide to make it out of essentially a con artist. And like I was mentioning, the kind of ethical, blurry lines that you can have between manipulation for entertainment or manipulation for kind of conning someone, and where that line is. I think it's not lost on Del Toro and audience members that Carlyle doesn't refer to himself necessarily as a con man or even a mentalist, but he's a hustler. And I don't think it's a coincidence that they use that word. And then you can open your Instagram Reels or your TikToks, and oftentimes you can see kind of hustle mentality, motivational videos or side hustles. The kind of everlasting prevalence of the kind of con artist, and how this is kind of going to be an ever prevalent thing, that yes, it's set in the 40s, but we have our own kind of con artists today, people that are just maybe trying to survive and get a little piece of something in their own, but maybe jump the social ladder by doing ethically kind of questionable things. But that, there are still going to be, for as many people that are, in depression or sickness or in a moment of weakness, there may be someone else that is willing to exploit that, and that's maybe just kind of the secret underlying nihilistic, pessimistic part of the human soul that Del Toro is really trying to explore. That maybe it's not the freaks on the outside that are the actual people to worry about. It's the people who have those kind of ethical quandaries or lack of morals that seep their way into more sophisticated society, but they're the actual con artists because they don't have some of that self-regard for morality and aren't unwilling to exploit someone during their weakest time. It's an interesting story, an interesting kind of morality play in that regard, and an interesting kind of subversion as well of what Del Toro is known for, which is these kind of monstrous creatures, but still within the themes of Del Toro's larger thesis of the kind of humans being the ultimate kind of monsters and creatures rather than the monsters itself. But this time, instead of monsters, it's maybe the freak shows of the carnies and all the kind of weird outsider kind of people within that scene. So it's a really fascinating text, a really beautifully looking film, and definitely a deserving one to be made after the gold. But that's about it, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. Make sure you comment below. Let me know your thoughts on this film. Have you seen it? Maybe what your thoughts on The Shape of Water. Was I right? And that's a movie that's maybe not as celebrated, or maybe it is and you love Del Toro. I'd love to hear all that stuff in the comments down below. And stay tuned for next week, Monday at 12 p.m. Eastern Time. We're going to have another one of these videos, so I hope you enjoy. But that's about it. Until next time, stay tuned.